Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the world, and welcome to another Agency Success live stream from hosting.com. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the agency trainer here with Agency Success, and we're talking about a very important topic today, and that is the scope strategy and how to have confident consultations with your clients. So about 14 years ago, I started coaching freelancers and micro agency owners. And after thousands of conversations over those years, I've learned that there are very few unique problems in agency work. Most of the challenges that we share are shared challenges, and the details may be a little different between our issues, but the story is usually the same. We struggle with problem clients. We struggle with scope creep. We struggle with clients who disappear. We struggle with cheap clients. A lot of these struggles are very similar. And in so many of those coaching conversations that I've had over the years, folks in our shoes working with clients get frustrated and angry and ready to quit because of difficult clients and projects. And the thing that I want to share with you today is that many of these issues that bring us so much frustration in our work can be minimized by what we're talking about today, and that is the client consultation. That very first meeting with a client where we're talking about who they are and what they need and how we might be able to assist them. And so what I want to do today is give you a framework for that conversation that will hopefully give you more confidence as you're meeting clients for the first time, but also help to weed out a lot of the difficult clients that make life difficult for us. So here's an overview of where we're going today. We're going to start off with talking about why we desperately need a strategy for client consultations, and we'll start with a few stories. Then we're going to unpack what is the purpose of this meeting anyway? Why are we having this consultation with the client? And last of all, I'll unpack what I've come to call the scope strategy. Now, that's a framework for guiding the conversation. And if you would like to download a one-page overview of that, I am dropping in the Agency Success Slack channel where we're having today's chat, the link to download today's slide deck. I do apologize. We're having an issue with the Zoom chat, but all of this chat is taking place over in the Agency Success Slack channel. And if you need the link to join that Slack channel, it is waiting on you there in the chat as well, the Zoom chat. So you can join Slack right there with that link. So that's where we're heading today. And I hope this will be a great time of clarity as we deal with this very important topic. So let's start talking about why do we need a strategy anyway for this conversation? And so a few stories to get us started. These are from my own experience and they actually happened, but we'll start with once upon a time. So once upon a time, I'm sitting in, I'm meeting a client in a coffee shop and I'm sitting there and the client finally comes in, they're running a little bit late and we have a conversation. And I think at the beginning, this client has real potential. This might be someone that we can work with and do a great project with. But as I'm sitting there, he keeps going on and on about how his dog escaped out of his fence that day. And he just continues on about everything about this dog and the stuff he's been doing that day. And before I know, it's been 45 minutes in this coffee shop. And by the time we finally get around to talking about the website, I realize that this person has no idea what they need or what they want or even where to begin. So have you ever spent hours talking to a client and gotten nowhere at all as far as the project is concerned? If you have, this is why we need the scope strategy. Or another story. Once upon a time, I'm sitting in my car after a meeting. And yes, that is actually my license plate. I am a WordPress geek. So I'm sitting in my car, actually outside this same coffee shop, different time, but outside the same coffee shop. I've just had another meeting with this client, a different client, and I think I've knocked it out of the park with this client. And I'm congratulating myself on how great this meeting has gone and how great of a client they could be and what this project is going to be about. And I'm excited about it. And then I realized something very important, that I forgot to talk about website management in this conversation. And if you know, or if you've heard me talk about these things before, you know that educating a client about the need for website management has to start at the very beginning of the conversation. And so already I'm behind where I need to be with this project. So have you ever left a consultation and forgotten to cover something important? And Murphy's Law says that the one time that you forget one thing to talk about with a client, it's going to be the most important thing that you should have talked about with a client, right? So if this is you and you've ever been there, that's why we have the strategy that I'm going to talk about today. One final story. So I'm sitting there and I'm checking my email. I had sent a proposal to a client and I was waiting on a response. Now, I had worked on this proposal for hours after spending a lot of time with the client talking about what they needed and what they wanted and all of this. And I've, all the right words in the proposal. Have you ever done this? Like you're struggling over what adjectives to use and, back and forth editing one particular line of the proposal just to get it right. And then you're thinking about the price. Well, what should I charge for this? Is it $6,500? No, maybe $6,000. No, I know, $6,250. And you finally land on the price that you want and you send the proposal and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're looking at your inbox and refresh, refresh, refresh. And finally, the response from the client comes back and it's like, $6,250. I thought this would be more like $500 for you to build my website. So have you ever agonized over a proposal only to discover that you were way off the client's budget? If this is you, and if you found yourself in any of those preceding stories, that's why it's important that we unpack the scope strategy. Why do we need this? Because in this first meeting with a client, we need to set the agenda. You are spending your time with this client, so we need to make it count. And I think it's helpful to just to adjust the way we think about this first consultation time. You are investing time in this client. Spending time, investing time, those are money words, right? Spending, investing, and that's really what you're doing. Whatever it is you charge per hour, you are investing that much money in this client for this first meeting, and they've not promised anything to you at this point, but we're making an investment, so we need to have a strategy to make that investment count and pay off. Your time has value. We think about dollar, money and time, and our time has value. We think about this a lot after the person becomes a client, but it's equally true before they ever sign on as a client. So in this meeting where you're going to invest an hour or maybe a little more, you are still investing money, time with that client. So let's talk about, what are we trying to do here? What is the purpose of this consultation that we have with the client? And I think a lot of times when we're trying to determine what something is, especially something that we may be familiar with, like we've all probably done client consultations, right? But sometimes when we think about what something is, it's helpful to think about what something is not. So I have a few things that describes what this time, this meeting, this consultation, what it shouldn't be. And the first is that it's not only to sell a website. The client consultation is not just to sell a website. Think of it more in terms of a first date. This is a person who's likely, if things go well and you build the site and you manage the site going forward, this is a person who is likely to be in your life for years to come. And the question is, do you want them there? It's like a first date. We're trying to figure out, is this relationship going to work? Because bad clients are never worth the mental and emotional capital that they require you to spend in them. Is this going to work out, right? So it's like a first date. We're not just there to sell a website. There's a lot more to it. So second of all, this is not to refine the client's business plan. Now, how many of you have had meetings with clients where you've given away hours of your time trying to help them think through what their business plan ought to be on how they deliver services or how they explain this and that. And in this very first conversation, when they've not signed anything or paid you anything, how much free consulting time have you given away? I've given away a lot over the years. So we're not there to refine the client's business plan yet, right? Now, you may be able to help with that, but that's a separate service, and it's something that they ought to be charged for. So something else, the consultation is not about answering how questions. So how we're going to do something, that's not what we're talking about in this conversation. We're there in this conversation to discover the what. If they want how, that requires payment. That's a rule of thumb for me. What questions are free? Like, what should we build? Those questions are free. How questions require payment. That taps into intellectual property. What questions are free? How questions cost money. And so many times in these initial conversations, I have wanted the client to think that I was really smart or whatever. And I've basically mapped out a whole solution and how we would do it. And then I never heard from them again. And the voice inside my head says they probably went to some low-skilled developer and told them exactly what they ought to do. Yeah. So we're not there to answer how. We're there to figure out what, so we can write a proposal. So with that, I'm going to offer 5 goals for what I think this thing ought to be. Why are we here today? Probably 5 things we need to do. And they happen to fall into the acronym SCOPE. So 5 goals for this consultation. So the S in SCOPE stands for scope. We want to learn enough about the project requirements to create a proposal. Now, for many of us, that's where it ends in this consultation. We just want to be able to write a proposal. And so we talk about what the website's supposed to be, and we create a scope of work, right? That's only one piece of it. Now, it's the majority of the conversation usually, but there are at least 4 other things we need to be doing in this client consultation. So the S in SCOPE stands for scope. The C in SCOPE stands for chemistry. We need to be figuring out, is this a person we want to work with? Is there chemistry here? Do I want this person around in my life for years to come? And we're going to go into each of these in more depth in just a moment. So the S in SCOPE is scope. The C is chemistry. O is ongoing. We need to explain the importance of our ongoing services like website management and other things we might offer. The P in SCOPE stands for process. So set expectations early by walking the client through the process that you use to build websites. And finally, the E in SCOPE stands for estimate. So at the end of this whole conversation, we're going to provide a ballpark estimate of what this site is roughly going to cost and get the client buy-in before we proceed. Now, I'm going to unpack all of this. It's likely you have some questions at this point, but what I'll say is this. Over the years, I've been building websites for clients for 30 years. I started in 1995. And as I've developed this method over those years, since I've been using it, I close over 90% of the proposals that I write. Now, your mileage may vary, but I've closed historically over 90% of the proposals that I've written using this strategy. So let's get into it just a little bit. The S in SCOPE stands for scope. We need to learn enough about the project requirements in order to create a proposal for the client. So we're going to ask some client intake questions. Now, this is nothing new, and you probably have a list of questions you like to ask. Now, one thing I like to do, though, when I'm thinking about these questions, is I like to think of them in terms of 5 different buckets of questions. So there's a business, there's the purpose, there's the website itself, there's the launch, and there's the budget. You may find more buckets that you have, but the idea here is it's not like a single checklist that you're just walking through all at once. Buckets let you be a little more flexible with the conversation. So for example, if I'm dealing with a brand new business, they've never had a website before, they're brand new, they're starting out, they need a website. We're going to start with the business questions first. Like, do they understand their business? Then probably talk a lot about the purpose and then the budget. You know, those are the 3 biggest priorities. Those are the issues that are going to help us decide pretty quickly if we're going to be able to work with them. If they're a nonprofit, I might want to start with the budget first to see, do they have budget actually for this project? So by focusing on like a bucket concept here and developing checklists per bucket, it lets you modify this conversation and be flexible depending on the kind of client that you're working with. So we definitely do want a consistent checklist for every consultation to make sure we're asking all the right questions. But being a little flexible with the way in and where we start and the most important parts of the conversation. Now, of course, these days, it's great to do Zoom calls with these consultations and to have a note taker that's present. And I always tell the client, I've got my note taker here, the AI note taker. It lets me be more present versus taking notes on every answer that you are giving me. And it's better. And then you'll have a transcript of the call. I'll also offer to send the client the transcript of the call if they want it. So that note taker and having a consistent checklist, absolutely critical. So I'm going to go into some example questions now that might fall into each of these buckets. Now, if you download the slides with the link that I provided in the chat and also there in the live streams channel of the Agency Success Slack group, what you'll find is the very first page of that slide deck is a one-pager of all of these questions. And my encouragement to you is to make these your own. This is not like the be-all, end-all list of the only questions you should ever ask. This is an example. It's a starting point, okay? So let's talk about the business and what kinds of questions maybe we should ask. So these are some questions I'll typically ask to a client. What's your elevator pitch or your coffee shop answer? In other words, can the client explain who they are, what they do, who they do it for in a single sentence that doesn't take 5 minutes to explain, right? Can they succinctly describe what they do? What do you do? What do you make? Who's your competition? Who is your ideal customer? Why should your ideal customer choose you instead of the conversation? What's your price point? How do you find your customers now? Do you have an existing brand identity? What is your price point? How do your customers find you now? So all these things are important. And the goal is, do they understand their business? Do they understand their business? Because that will tell you sometimes the client is not ready for a website. They may need some help with marketing consulting and how to articulate their value proposition and who is their ideal client and who they're going for. And by the way, if you have been doing client work in website design for any length of time, you understand that the bottleneck is generally getting the content out of the client, right? Give me the words for the website. Help me understand how to explain your business to your customer. This is often why projects get stalled on content, because the client is hit with all these questions of how do I talk about myself online and who is my ideal? And they get into this existential spiral and freeze and don't ever write the content. So a lot of times this is where things get stalled because the client isn't ready for a website. They need some marketing help. And maybe you can offer that. Maybe that's a service that you offer, but that's different than building the website. So asking these questions about the business to figure out, are they even ready? Super important. Now, another bucket of questions you could ask is what I've called the purpose bucket. So how does the web fit into your business strategy? A lot of people, a lot of clients they just have this idea that if I build a website, immediately that's going to result in my phone ringing off the hook and more customers than I can take. And that's, you and I know that's simply not the case. So how does this fit into everything else you're doing in marketing? Why should your ideal customer come to your website? What are your goals for the website? Or in other words, if 6 months after the website launches, we want to say this website is a success, how do we determine that? Like, what are the factors involved in knowing whether this project was successful? Can they articulate that? And the goal here with the questions in the purpose bucket is, how much strategy assistance am I going to need to provide? Because a lot of times in building a website, we end up doing marketing consultation. We end up doing business strategy with our clients to just get the project over the finish line because they haven't thought about these things before. And that's great. It's wonderful if you can do those things, but that's different than building a website, and we ought to be pricing a little differently. That raises our price point to include some of these other services. So again, the client may not be ready for a website. Maybe they need a discovery phase to figure out what it is they're trying to accomplish or how this fits into some of their other tools or whatever. And a discovery phase is super important. If we can't articulate answers to a lot of these questions, that's when we go into discovery. And, there's a lot of talk these days about paid discovery. Let's just simplify it right to this point. Discovery is just a scope and a deliverable for a price. The scope is we're going to answer these questions. The deliverable is we're going to give you a document with the answers, and here's how much it's going to cost. So the client may not be ready for a website yet. We got to make sure they understand the business, what the purpose of the site is, what's going to, what it needs to be and do. Now we can talk about the website. So it's very likely that you have a lot of these questions in your list of things to talk about already. In many cases, this is the only questions we ask, and we're not asking bigger questions about goals and purpose and that sort of thing. When we start thinking about the website is, who's going to be our point of contact? Super important if you're dealing with an organization where like maybe it's a nonprofit and there's 8 people who are stakeholders on the website. We talk to one person, right? Like who's the primary point of contact? Who's the decision maker? Do you have a domain? And by the way, do you have access to the domain? Where's the content for the website going to come from? Do you need help with that? Roughly, how many pages do you think the site might include? Are you going to be blogging or sharing news items? Are you selling things online, or do you want to have a membership of some sort on your site? And you might have a whole set of sub questions for e-commerce things like, are you selling downloads? Do you have products that require shipping? Do you have items that have options like colors and sizes? How do you handle shipping costs, fulfillment, and taxes? And if they haven't thought through these things and you get the deer in the headlights look, maybe it's time to request a discovery phase to help them think through the strategy of having an e-commerce site or a membership site or whatever. Are you going to have events, registration, ticketing? Do your clients need to log in for any reason? That's a big one, right? Because that opens up a whole can of worms about what this client side of the website looks like. Are there compliance criteria that must be met? For example, if you're doing a website for a financial professional, there's all kinds of compliance things that are involved. And you may end up back and forth with their compliance over wording and things. So make sure time for that is built into the project. Are there any third-party integrations needed, or do we got to connect to something? Other functionality questions that you might have. A couple of other catch-all questions that I find are very helpful are, is the website for online credibility, or do you want to get new leads from search results? Now, I always ask this question because it lets me know, is this someone who's trying to generate lead? Like, do they need an SEO strategy? Or are they they want the website so that if someone looks them up, they look credible? Both of those are legitimate. And there are many of our clients who honestly, they don't want 50 new leads every week. They're a small professional firm or whatever. They couldn't handle that many leads anyway if they came in. So what they want is somebody looks them up and they look great on the web. So is it a credibility piece like that? Or do they actually need legitimate SEO strategy? So that opens up another conversation about SEO and what that looks like. Then there's the final question, aside from communicating information and other things we've talked about. Is there anything else the website needs to do? So that gives them the opportunity to talk about other things that they have expectations for about their website. So the goal here in this piece is we need to have enough to create a solid scope of work in a proposal. So we're going to ask all the questions to unpack what does this website need to do so we can write a scope of work for our proposal. Now, the next bucket of our questions is what I've called the launch bucket. So in the launch bucket, you could have all sorts of questions. A couple of example ones would be, is there a deadline? Like, does this have to be out by a certain time? And if so, and it's a short deadline, maybe you talk about a rush charge or something like that. Or you talk about if it's got to be live in 8 weeks, then here are some milestones that need to be met. Like, we'll have to have your content approved by a certain time, the design approved by a certain time, your approval to launch the site by a certain time in order to be able to launch on that date. So just kind of talking through deadlines and those sorts of issues. And this is a really important question. Who is going to be responsible for managing the site after launch? So the goal here in this bucket is talking about time frame and all the things involved in that, and then planting a seed to start the discussion about ongoing services later. So one more bucket, and that is the budget bucket. Budget, obviously, tricky part of the conversation. A lot of folks it's a little weird to talk about money with a client. And it's generally, for most of us who are doing client work, it's something we just have to learn. It does not come natural for very many of us. So the question is, do you have a budget for this project? What is the budget? And just ask. And if they don't want to share, a lot of times I'll begin with, our websites typically begin at this many dollars, and increase in price based on the scope of work. And then you get to see, do they swallow hard? Do they nod? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. At least test the water. But in general, you want them to offer the budget to you. If it's a low number, gosh, that's less than our minimum project. So are there some things we could do to simplify this? Maybe we create phases to phase in some of the things they want in their website. Also, we're going to ask, what is the decision-making process involved for you selecting the right web developer for you? And when do you expect to make that decision? So the goal here in this bucket is, we just need to make sure we're not wasting time here with a client that's got a $500 budget, or they're interviewing 18 people or whatever. I want to make sure I'm not wasting my time with this client. So those aren't all the questions you should ask, but they're examples of the kinds of intake questions you could ask in these 5 buckets of questions. So I always suggest that you create some sort of intake form on your website where many of these questions that are detail-oriented are asked. And I make that form a prerequisite for having this client consultation. So I want to start this conversation with a lot of these questions kind of answered already, so that I can just ask probing questions about some of their answers, clarify their answers during the call. And so, like for us, we put this form, the discovery form is in front of the calendar to book the appointment. So they go through the process of answering these questions. And at the end, hey, thanks we emailed you your answers also, and here's the link to book a discovery call. So that's the way we do it, and it's the way I recommend it. So in the scope strategy, that takes probably 45 minutes of the call to ask clarifying questions about these intake items that we've discussed. But now we move into the second piece of the strategy, and that is the C for chemistry. Can't forget this one. We need to determine if this is a client we can work with. So at this point in the call, we've probably spent about 45 minutes thereabouts. With we've back and forth, we've had some good conversation. We've understood a little bit about who they are, what they want. And so our goal, we have to keep in mind we're not just trying to sell a website here. Selling a website is great, but selling the website to the wrong kind of client is awful, and we want to avoid that. So during this, for the C in scope for chemistry, during the conversation that we're having about the scope of work, we're going to listen and watch for red flags that pop up during the conversation. And so at this point, we're 45 minutes in about, by now we ought to have a gut feeling of whether or not, is this a person that I want to work with or not? Is there something about this client that kind of popped out as a red flag? And so here's some common red flags, by the way, that I see a lot that make me pause to say, is this really a person I want to work with? Unanswered questions are a big red flag. So they don't know what they need. And if that's the case, maybe we don't want to work with them, or maybe they need a discovery phase. And if they're willing to do some discovery, then maybe it'd be a good fit on the other end of that. We'll just have to see, but this is a red flag. Disrespectfulness. This is a huge one. If the client doesn't listen to you, like the client is coming to you, hopefully, because they're looking for a professional to build their website that knows what they're doing, because the client can't or doesn't want to do it themselves. And so if you've got a professional who does this for a living, and if they don't listen to you, or if they interrupt all the time, or if they won't answer your question, or if they haggle excessively, or if they won't take advice that you give them, this is a huge red flag. If the client is a jerk, move on. This is not a person that I want in my world. If you are on a first date with someone who doesn't listen, interrupts, won't answer questions, I don't want a second date with that person. And I certainly don't want a client in my agency who we're going to have to deal with this garbage for the next 5 years. It's just not worth it. Disrespectfulness, huge red flag. Another red flag, scheduling problems. Now, there's legitimate scheduling problems. I get it. I've had to reschedule appointments. You probably have too. But if the client is hard to reach, like you send an email and then who knows what happens, right? Or they reschedule it, or if they're late to the meeting, these are, again, not deal breakers, but red flags, because in my experience, these things don't get better once the project starts. Like I used to tell myself in my head, oh, once they start working, this won't be an issue. It's usually, sometimes it gets even worse when you're actually in the project. They become harder to reach, or they keep on rescheduling even more, or they're late and late and late and late, always, always, right? So again, not a deal breaker, but a red flag to pay attention to. Here's another one, complaining. If the client is a complainer, like there are very few things that just really get on my nerves, but a person who constantly complains, like that's my tolerance level for that. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old or something. I don't know, but my tolerance level goes way down for complainers. And particularly if the client complains about a previous web developer who did everything wrong, it's a full stop, and we're going to talk about that. Like, I want to understand what happened. I want to understand, where did this go off the rails? How did the developer not meet your expectations? What was going on in there? Because it could be that this previous developer that they had, that this was just not good. And, they were incompetent, or they were a difficult person themselves, or whatever. And it could really be the developer's fault, or it could be that this is a client who could not be pleased. And I don't want them in my world because they'll probably be complaining about me to somebody else up the road because I couldn't meet their expectations. I don't know. Again, not a deal breaker, but a red flag. The final red flag that I'll mention, and there's obviously more, but is urgency. So if the client needs everything done immediately, again, not a deal breaker necessarily, but it could be that this was like a legitimate last minute thing and there was no way to avoid it. Or it could be that this client procrastinates, and then everything's an emergency. And those people are very difficult to work with. They're very difficult to work with because they'll put off things during the project. And then all of a sudden, oh, we got to get it done. We got to get it done. And that's the kind of stress we don't really want as we're working with clients. So these are common red flags, not deal breakers, but we also don't want to ignore them because oftentimes these red flags are just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger problem that's hiding underneath that doesn't show up until we get into the project. So don't just, a red flag is not a deal breaker, but also don't think that a red flag is just no big deal. Remember, this is a first date, and you're likely getting the best version of the client in this conversation that you'll ever get again because they're on their best behavior. You're a new person, right? So don't make excuses for the client. In there are some of us who do this, and if this doesn't resonate with you, it's okay. But there are many people I know right now, this is going to resonate with you because it's just a natural thing I do in a conversation with someone. A red flag pops up and I make an excuse for the client in my head about why they said that or why they thought that. And I let that excuse sit in my head, and it makes me maybe ignore that red flag. What I've had to learn over the years, and it's not natural for me, what I've had to learn over the years is just to ask questions. Like, I've noticed that you said this, or I noticed that. Help me understand that more. Like, don't just make excuses for the client in my head, but actually ask questions to get clarity about it instead. So that's the chemistry piece of scope. We've talked about the scope of work for the project. We've talked about chemistry. Is this a client I want to work with? And if we keep going, yes, it's a good client, then we're going to move to the O in scope, which is ongoing services. We're going to explain the importance of your ongoing website management services. So if you're going to sell website management, education is the key. And it could simply be this. Look, we offer a website care plan. It's important. We want to be a long-term partner for the health and success of your website going forward. We offer everything your site needs to be healthy ongoing, the hosting, updates, backup, security. We handle all those details, and we do it. You don't have to find 800 people to work with. It's one email, one call, one neck to strangle when it comes to your website if something goes wrong. And that's part of the pricing. Like I'll explain, when you get a proposal from us, there's going to be a price to build and a price to manage. And we require website management for the projects that we build. That's the way we do it. You may do it differently, but you at least have to plant the seed about the ongoing services, because when you deliver a proposal to the client, it should contain no surprises. So we don't want to put website management in the proposal if we haven't talked about it already. So most clients, good clients, are going to be happy that they don't have to go figure out hosting for themselves. You offer it as their trusted website partner. So the S in scope stands for scope. The C is chemistry. O, start the discussion about ongoing services. And P, this is a short one, but it's important, the process. So we're going to set expectations by explaining the process we use to build websites. And this for me is usually a minute or two. It's just a quick thing. And my question to you today is, can you briefly explain your website creation process? Can you briefly explain it? I got it down to about a minute or two, and then I'll answer questions about it. And the reason this is important, just explaining the steps and how it's going to work, it gives the client a comfort level that you know what you're doing. Like, you're not doing this project by the seat of your pants. I explain the value our process brings. Like, we've shaped this process over 30 years. And when we follow our process, we get great websites on the other end. And so we set expectations for their involvement. For us, we need content approval, we need design approval, we need launch approval. So we do need you interacting with us throughout the project, but that's all you'll have to do. And you get opportunities to interact and ask any questions that they have about the process. So the P in scope stands for process. And finally, and this is sort of the secret sauce, the E stands for estimate. So this is how I end every client consultation. I want to give them a price estimate and get their buy-in on that estimate before I go any further. Now, why is this important? I don't want to spend extra time writing a proposal if they're not on board with the ballpark estimate price of where this project is going to land. So do you know your price points? Do you have general ranges of price for different kinds of projects? So if somebody needs to build just a basic brochure site, about how much does that cost? If somebody wants an e-commerce project, about how much does that cost? A large site, a small site, a membership site, about how much does that cost? And we're talking about an approximate price here. And so usually, this ballpark approximate price is plus or minus $1,000, or I'll give $1,000 range for a project. And, generally speaking, you should maybe have some ideas of what basic projects should cost. Now, all that is up for, if there's something special, that's different, obviously. But the question I ask when I get to this point of the scope strategy is, do I know how much this project should cost? If I can say yes, 100%, then I'll give them an estimate right there in that conversation, plus or minus $1,000. So it sounds something like, based on what you're describing, this sounds like a $7,000 to $8,000 project. That's the kind of estimate that I'm going to give. Do I know what it should cost? Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Maybe I need to look at a couple things real quick, not spend a lot of time investigating, but I need to just check into a couple of things. So give me a couple of days and I'll provide a price estimate. Not a proposal yet, but I would email the client back and say, we've looked into the couple of questions that we had, and based on that, we believe this project will cost, $8,000 to $10,000 or $10,000 to $11,000 or whatever the estimate's going to be. And if they are on board with that estimate, then we'll write the proposal. So do I know how much it should cost? Yes, give them the estimate. Maybe give it a day or two, email them the estimate. If I have no idea, because there's so many unanswered questions, that's when we're going to get into a discovery phase to answer those questions and then to be able to provide a price. Now, at this point, we're going to try to get client buy-in. So the statement I would say would be something like, This project should cost $6,000 to $7,000. Will that work for your budget? Sure. Oh no, I was thinking this would be much less. Well, that's your answer, right? Will that work for your budget? And if they say, sure, okay, if I have a proposal for you tomorrow in that price range, are you ready to start? Just ask the question. So if they're not bought in on the price point, or, do they got to go through and find other developers? They have to get 3 estimates or whatever the process is. You may want to pause or not at that point, but if they're bought in on the price point, great. If they don't buy into the price point, I don't write the proposal. And the way I look at it is, I am not in the business of writing proposals. I'm not. I make no money from writing proposals. I make money from getting web projects. Now, yes, proposals go into that, but my point is this. I've already spent an hour or maybe a little more with this client. I've already invested in them, a lot of my time. So I don't want to go invest more time to write a proposal, another hour or whatever it's going to be to write that proposal with no commitment from them that they're even going to work with us. So I at least want the buy-in on the estimate before we write the proposal. So that, folks, is the scope strategy. It is a memorable outline to guide the discovery conversation. And so my encouragement to you is to use this framework, make it your own, add your own questions, maybe, move some things around, but this is a framework that you can model to your own personality, to your own offerings, and to how you like to work. But at the end of the day, it ought to really help to weed out the clients you don't want to work with and really highlight the clients that you do want to work with. Now, I'm going to drop in one more time the link to the slide deck. It is in the Slack group, and it is also in the webinar chat. And that has this one pager at the very beginning. That's the scope strategy on one sheet, but also the other decks for the slides. We got a bunch of questions that have come in, and I'm super excited about that. But before we get to those, let me just invite you to have a conversation with Mike Demo. If you are an agency and you are hosting clients as part of your care plan, we would love to chat with you about how what hosting.com offers can fit into your price point. I'm looking at the participants, and I already see that there's several of you that have contacted Mike Demo and you've reached out. Some of you have made the decision to move your hosting over to hosting.com. We personally, in my agency, we've been hosting with hosting.com for years. Previously, it was A2 Hosting, which was acquired by hosting.com. We've been a customer for years, very, very satisfied with the quality of the hardware, the speed, the reliability, and the support. So I would encourage you to reach out to Mike. Mike has done the agency life. He understands our challenges, and he'll be able to answer technical questions and help you navigate what's the best solution if you're looking to host your clients on one reliable hosting platform for your care plans, to power your care plans, and now hosting.com can be a part of that. So scan that link code or just call him or shoot him a text at that number, and he'll get you the information to book a call and find the best hosting solution for you. All right, let's get to some questions. Several questions have been asked in the Zoom Q&A, and if you have questions to ask, please open that Zoom Q&A and drop them in right there, and I will endeavor to answer them. So Scott asks, do you share this structure of the meeting with the client ahead of time? I haven't before. Might be a good idea. I don't think I want to tell them, well, I'm going to decide if we have chemistry or not. Probably not. I might share the buckets of questions, but they're generally going to get the discovery form, which is the buckets of questions. And so when we have a call or before the call, I might explain what we're going to do so they have an understanding of that. But I don't think I would share the scope strategy itself. That's really more internally focused. Does that make sense, Scott? And again, we are chatting in the live streams channel of the Agency Success Slack group. All right. Another question from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, this is a great question. I noticed you seldom mention domain management. Is this something you consider a part of hosting or something you don't manage? That's a great question, Jeffrey. And I was advised years ago by my attorney not to register domain names on behalf of clients. And the reason that's important is, and the way I explain to the client is the domain name is an asset for the business. It's something they should own themselves. And so sometimes we will facilitate that or get on a Zoom call and help them buy a domain name or whatever. But we don't manage it for them in the sense of we buy it and we keep it in our account and we pay the renewal. It's a potentially a huge risk because if something happens to your card and the domain goes away, there is massive liability for that. So we encourage the client to own that domain name as an asset for their business. Does that help? Does that make sense? All right. Another question from Scott. Scott says, how does the business questionnaire fit in? And Scott, I think that was asked early in the live stream. If you can clarify that a little bit, either in the live streams chat or ask another question in the Zoom Q&A, I'll be happy to get more into that. I'm not fully sure I understand that question. Question for Paul. Booking time with Mike. Looking to explore switching hosting. I see he has 15 and 30-minute slots. Is 15 minutes enough or should I book 30 minutes? I think, Paul, I would recommend you book 30 minutes just to unpack all the things that, you want to do and what you're thinking about and give him time to answer those questions. Yeah. If you just want some basic answers, a 15-minute slot should be fine. But if you really want to have more of a consultative conversation, I would do the 30 minutes. Yeah. Ben, do you send any of the scope questions prior to a call? Yes. So it's on our website is a discovery form. And in order to book the discovery call, they must have completed many of these questions ahead of time. So always recommend that. Get questions answered ahead of time and then highlight the questions somehow that, you need more clarity on these areas. And that shapes the S part of this conversation. As based on their answers, you're unpacking that, asking questions for clarity. So definitely give them that form ahead of time. That's a little test to see how serious they are about working, having a website project. Our form takes about 10 minutes to complete, we say. For some, it's been a lot less because they know the answers to the questions already. They've thought about them already. We just invest 10 minutes to complete this form. We'll send you your answers by email so you have those. And it will help shorten the amount of time it takes us during this call so we can all use our time the best way. Scott, this is your question. You mentioned that you have a questionnaire on your intake form website. Oh, since you asked that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So having a good intake form is super important. I do not recommend having a book a call link in your email signature or, just on your website because that lets anybody in the world book time with you unless you want that. I mean, if you want that, that's certainly a way to do it. But you end up getting a lot of spam these days too. But putting it behind a form where they have to give some answers and invest a little time with you before you invest some more time with them, I think that's the best way to do this. Scott, can I start with your questionnaire? So that's why I've provided this. Take that one pager, let that be the beginnings of a form of questions to ask. Modify it, make it your own, ask things a different way so it fits your personality. But yeah, that's why I've given you that one pager. Go for it. Well, let me just mention before we wrap up today, our final or our new upcoming links, these links to upcoming live streams that have just been published. Every Thursday, we do have office hours here on Agency Success, and I'm here to answer any questions you have. You can ask questions at wpnathan.com and just click the Ask a Question button. That's every Thursday. We have office hours. The 14th, that's today. Tomorrow, we have a really interesting live stream with someone from the WP Rocket team, Joe DeSalvo. Is going to be talking about boosting site speed. That is tomorrow. If you haven't signed up for that one, it ought to be great. Also, the roller coaster to rocket, how to supercharge your agency through a retainer strategy. That is Ali Feldman, the global head of sales for hosting.com. That is going to be a good one from someone who deeply understands the selling process. So if you haven't signed up for that one, certainly do that. That's coming up the 22nd. I'll be doing a technical webinar on the 29th about demystifying DNS. So if you get confused about DNS, you're definitely not alone, and we'll be unpacking that. And finally, this one just added, the 4th of November, I'll be talking about the referral engine and how to attract better clients without selling. So all of those are free and upcoming. You can get to that link tree using the links that are there in the live streams channel of the Agency Success Slack group. Let me answer one more question here from Terry, and then we'll call it a day. So Terry says, suggests making it two ways: a form to see how serious someone is, or a book a call link that has a payment option first. You could do that. So that, I don't know how much success you would have with that if the first book a call link requires a payment. You could try it. We've not done that because I don't think it would work with our kinds of clients. But it could, just depends on who you're working with. All right. Well, folks, that is going to wrap us up for today. Thanks for hanging out with me for the last hour. Hopefully this was a good investment of your time and you have a little different way, or maybe it's just brushed up a little bit on how you do client consultations. But I would encourage you all to use the scope strategy. It's going to end up giving you better clients and more confidence as you have those conversations. That's going to wrap it up for us today. Thanks for being with us. I'm back on Thursday for office hours here on Agency Success with hosting.com, where we go further together.